Okay, today I'm going to install some Locoman sounds into this Hornby King class. This is the latest King class release. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to proceed. My intent is to use one of these Tang band speakers. I really like these. This is the 1925 S that you can probably see the box for here. It's quite a large speaker. It has the normal speaker driver here and a bass reflector, and if I press on this you might see that the driver itself runs and the bass reflector vibrates according to that. I recently installed Locoman sound in an earlier King class for a customer, and I was really impressed by how well it sounded, so I figure I should do a demonstration here of how I've installed it, or how I would go about the install using this big speaker. This is on Locoman's Locksound 5 decoder, which you can see here. The sound file itself is recorded off a real King class. I'm not sure exactly which one, whether it's 6024 I think, but anyway, I know that Locoman has got some very good equipment and has been, he went to Didcot if I remember rightly and did the recordings of this, and it sounds really good, especially with a decent punchy speaker. So I'm going to start working through the install process and we'll see how we go. Okay, the first thing to do with any Loco like this is, first of all, you should be testing the decoder, and if you saw my previous video on the J11, you would have noticed that I use one of these ESU lock programmers to test, because I'd received this sound file as a reblow from Locoman that was just specifically for this decoder. I actually did the installation on here and tested it on here, so I know the decoder works. The other thing you should do is test your Loco to make sure that it works on DC. Always do that first, because if you run into problems with your Loco later on, you'll find that you know, the first thing you'll ask yourself was, did it run on DC? So always make sure that it runs on DC before you get going on the Loco. Okay, the first thing that we've got to do is try and plan out our attack on how we're going to install it. Now, when you're doing a new install like this, you could take a very easy route. This is an 8-pin connector here that you can see, and if I lift this tender body off, you'll see that there is an 8-pin socket right here, so you could just take that out, replace the replace the blanking plug with the 8-pin decoder, making sure to put the right one in with pin 1, and if you're wondering about where that is, you might just be able to see there's a little mark up here on the decoder blanking plug. See pin 1 here, and all you've got to do is make sure that you align the orange wire. The orange wire there is pin 1, and that goes into that socket right there. One of the tricky things to figure out when you're doing these installs is how to get the Locos apart. I always say read the manual, and you'll notice that on the tender there's 2 screws here, and then on the Loco there's 1 screw at the front, and Hornby Locos are usually all the same. There's 1 screw at the front, and then the chassis itself tilts down and you can draw it out that way. You'd probably also be good to disconnect the Loco and tender at this stage as well, and if you look here, there's this is a plug decoder plug, or plug-in tender, sorry, and there's a white plug here, and so you can disconnect that plug and separate the Loco and tender. So I'll do all that, get the Loco body off as well, because with this one I'm not going down the simple route. Obviously, if I'm going to install a big speaker, I'd also want to be doing some other stuff with this, and so what I'm going to be doing is also putting firebox flicker in the Loco itself. Now, you could even go further and put working marker lamps on there. I don't like doing that because one, they were very dull, and most of the time the lamps I've seen are actually too bright. I've got an A4 Pacific with those lights on, So I usually leave the lamps alone because that way I can change the lamp codes later on as well. So it's up to you. You could install those, but like I say, that's not my preference. And I'm doing this up as a demo. Probably at the end of this, after I've filmed a few sequences, I'll probably sell it because I'm a LNER modeler, and while a king did visit through the area that I model, not in Great Western, well, it probably was in GWR, guys. Anyways, it's not a Loco that's going to stay here on my layout for too long. So what we'll do is I'll strip the body and then show you what we're going to do next. Okay, I've got the Loco body off now and the tender body. So now we start planning for what's going on. If you look at the decoder itself, it's not too large, but it won't fit sideways. It's got to fit somewhere in here. It won't fit down by the coal space. And if we try to fit in this speaker here, if I cut these tabs off, they're just mounting tabs, so they're not structural or any part of it. We run out of space real fast. If I look at the side of the body here, and I must admit, so there's a few things with this Hornby Loco that I'm not overly impressed with. First of all, the mounting for the tender onto the body has two posts right in the middle of where we would need some real estate to do some DCC sound installations. Now, if you went the simple route, you wouldn't need to worry about these. There'd be enough room for a decoder in there. You could fit the speaker down in the speaker area here under the weight, and it'd probably all be okay. The trouble is, that doesn't sound very well. It sounds okay, but it doesn't sound as good as if we can do with a speaker. The other thing that is really quite disappointing is that Hornby makes a special tool, which I had here before, but they make a special tool for removing these plugs out of the sockets in the tender. The trouble is that they've recessed that plug down so far that their tool for removing the plug doesn't even work. So that's another black mark, I think, for Hornby. But, you know, this is what we've got to expect. It's a brand new Loco. It's highly detailed. It's got all the works and jerks on it. And we're trying to do something a bit beyond the ordinary. The other thing that you've got to expect when you're doing installations like this is bits fall off. So you might have seen this up here on the magnetic part of the ESU Loco cradle. That's just the injector. It goes on the side of the chassis down here, and it's not been super glued on very well, so that'll have to be glued on later. You've got to be prepared when you're doing this sort of work that no matter how careful you might be, things might still fall off, etc. So always be prepared that if you're going to get stuck in, this is going to disturb the model. It's not going to be pristine, but you'll have a Loco that sounds so much better than anybody else's. So if you're squeamish, probably time to look away. If you're not, keep following and we'll keep going. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have a go at now is, and please don't get scared, it's a drill, it's alright, is we're going to make a little hole in the firebox door on the back head of the Loco. So if you look in here, the Loco's firehole door is there, and on this it's very well modelled. I must admit that while I was having a bit of a whinge about Hornby earlier, you look at that backhead detail, it's just amazing. So now I'm just going to drill a few little holes in there to make a slot. And so the firehole door will get light coming out in a vertical slot rather than being a round hole, and that's much more prototypical. I drive steam locos in full size, so I know what they're like, and so what I'm going to do is drill a series of holes through there and then just open them out with a knife to make a nice vertical slot. It's only going to be very thin because these firehole doors are actually modelled in the closed position, so I'm just going to make it as if it was just slightly ajar. So I'm going to do that now. I don't know if you're scared or not, but here we go. So the drill, I'm just going to put the drill in here, right in the bottom, and drill a hole through. Now I'm using this battery powered Dremel. It was actually sold in the hardware stores to clean golf balls, but I find it really good for doing plastics because it's slow speed. And that's enough for now. And so that's the start of getting the firebox flicker going. So, all right, I'll open that out now, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, so just showing you now, you might be able to see it's slightly out of focus, sorry, but you might be able to see the slot is cut in there, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, so that's ready to go now. So what I'm going to use is one of these 3mm orangey LEDs. I really like the colour they give. It's pretty close to what I know a file looks like. But what I'm going to do is actually file it down into a bit of a point of like a flat bladed screwdriver to fit in that slot, and it'll stay more secure there, and it'll also look pretty good just peeking out through the slot in the door. So I'm going to file that away, and so all you just use is a normal file. Don't file too far, and file on the flats with the way the LED prongs are situated. So those LED prongs, so there's the side, turn them on their side like that, and then you can go through and file down to a bit of a point. The top, probably above the metal bits that you can see in the LED here, if I move it into the center of the shot, basically that bit from there above is all just like a resin, a coloured resin to give part of the colour to the LED. So there's no problem filing that away to be able to get it to fit into a particular spot. Okay, so the LED's now filed. You might be able to see it against this white background. I've just got like a chisel edge to it, or a flat bladed screwdriver edge. And the intent is that that goes into the back head of the Loco, into the slot in the fire hole door. So what I'm going to do now is, now that I know that that's working okay, I'm just going to set the lead up ready to go into the Loco itself, and then just glue it in, and well, I'll solder the lead ready first, and show you about that. Okay, so now we're going to set up the LED to fit within the Loco, but the first thing to do is that all LEDs, when hooked up to decoders, unless the decoder's got purpose-built resistors in there, you need to put a resistor in with the LED, otherwise you'll blow the LED. Now diodes have two legs on them. The longer one, if I go to my handy dandy shortcut that I have on my layout to tell me what's going on here, the longer one is the anode and is the positive, and that's where you solder the resistor to, and the shorter one is the negative. And because polarity is really important on LEDs to get that right, if you don't, the LED won't light. It is only passes DC current in one way, so you've got to get that polarity right. And I've got a little thing that I've written on my layout just to remind me which one is which all the time, because I'm always forgetting. So we're going to solder this up now and get it ready for putting in the Loco. So when it comes to wiring up DCC decoders and sound, etc., I really like using this ESU wire. It's really flexible, it's quite thin, so it's easy to hide and get into difficult places, and it comes in all the right colours. I've got all 8 colours. I know that's probably going a bit overboard, but I like to use it again to keep things neat and professional, well, as professional as I can be. So we've got blue and white. Blue is the common positive that comes out of a decoder, and white is for the forward headlight, and yellow is for the rear headlight. I'm going to show you something a bit later on about how I wire these up, but at the moment I'm just going to wire a blue and white wire to the LED, cover it in heat shrink, and then it's ready for installation in the Loco. Okay, so this is again another basic wiring tutorial, or soldering tutorial. So I've stripped about, what would you call it, 1/4 inch or 5-6 millimeters of wire off the end here on both the blue and the white. Now I don't need to have it that long in order to solder it, but I like doing this on the LEDs just to make sure it's a good connection. On the decoders I actually solder that long and then clip it off, but again really simple. So I've stripped off a bit just using a cutter, those cutters you can see up there, and twisted the ends, and then just hold the end of the wire next to the solder, touch both like so, and then you run it along and you've done that, and again with the white wire, touch on there, run the solder up, and you've got two nicely tinned wires ready for soldering. So I'm just going to solder the LED now. I'm not going to show you all of that, and then put the heat shrink on. Now I've kept these leads quite long because we've got to go from the tender back, got to go from the Loco back to the tender in order to get to the decoder, because the decoder is going to sit in the tender. So now we're going to wire these up, and I'll show you the finished result when it's done. Okay, so just moving along further, just be careful when you're doing this. There's some very thin sand pipes here on the Loco, so don't try and damage them. I've managed to retain them so far. Now, the lead's gone from being nice and straight to now got a curly bend in it. And the reason being is we've got to fit it up inside the Loco. It's got to fit right up in here. And look, there's one thing that you'll learn when you start doing lots of DCC installs is there's never enough room in these Locos. So trying to keep things neat and tidy and out of the road. On Firebox Flicker, what you've got to watch quite carefully is that the LED will fit in the back here behind the motor. And not every Loco will allow you to do this. There's a bit of space here in the King. It's got actually quite a bit of room, so I'm really quite happy with that. But some other Locos I've done recently, yes, they're nowhere near as simple as that. So next I'm going to just glue this in place and leave it, and we can move on to the actual sound installation. So here we go. Okay, so now you can see hopefully that I've got that LED in there, and the wires go right up to the top, and so it's going to be out of the road of everything when we put it back. So I'm going to set this aside now, let the glue cure properly, and we'll move on to the tender. Okay, so the next step in this is to start preparing the tender. So if we have a look at the tender body here and putting it together over the top, what we want to be able to do is create some real estate in here. Now that's going to mean cutting out this coal bunker. It's probably going to mean losing these two mounting points, but I'm going to create a new mounting point. But I'm also going to completely strip the Loco of all of the wire, all of the associated hardware that's already in there for DCC connection. And the reason being is that we want to try and minimize the amount of additional space that we need with wiring, etc. So what I'm going to try and do is what I am going to do is remove the weight, remove this mounting block here. I may still keep the 8-pin plug, we'll see how we go with that, and then try and create some space here to fit what is a very big speaker. As you can see, if I put this in here, that takes up a fair amount of room, so it's got to come down. It's going to be mounted underneath and up under the tender up there. So we've got to make sure that we've got enough room for the speaker and the decoder. Okay, so we're going to disconnect all of this now. So there's just a few screws to undo. Hopefully you can see all that. You can probably tell I'm using an ESU, I think it's branded up there, an ESU Loco cradle. These are really good. I've done a bit of work with ESU over the years through an Australian manufacturer, but I just love this. I think it's really, really good. I'm probably, this one's already been beaten about a bit after a couple of years, so you know, I think it's still pretty good though. And so just unscrewing everything here, just to make sure we start off. One thing I really like about this ESU Loco cradle is that its magnetic strip up here is really good for keeping all of the screws that come off. So now we can remove the weight, and this weight is really quite flimsy. There's not much to it at all, and so we could probably replace that with some liquid gravity. If you've used that stuff before, this is the Deluxe Materials liquid gravity. It's just some shot, but it's not lead. It's something else. I forget what it is, and I should know. But it's really quite useful to pour in spaces, but securing it with super glue. Okay, so moving right along, what I've done with the tender is to remove the fake coal load out and expose the bunker. I've also clip those locating tabs off the big speaker, ready for installation. I've also decided to remove the 8-pin plug and hardwire this because the wires are color coded and so they're ready for DCC connection, and to be honest, it's much safer to always hardwire the decoder than it is to rely on the plug. I've also worked out how to secure the tender back once we get going. So instead of using the two legs here I want to create some real estate for, I'm going to remove those and probably reinstall one right in the back here to secure the tender down and hold the tender down. I may even use one at the front here as well, where we've got the mounting plate ready for the Loco to have a screw at the front and the back. So anyway, we'll see how we go with that. But the next stage in order to create real estate is to cut out the coal bunker, and that's a pretty scary prospect for a lot of people. To be honest, I don't mind doing it. I do it on a lot of Locos. I find the easiest way, well, first of all we're going to get rid of these two posts, and then we're going to cut here first and then vertically cut along there, and then use a pair of cutters to get rid of as much of the remaining material as possible. So I'm going to do that on high speed so you can hopefully get a view of it. I'm going to use my new Milwaukee cordless drill, or rotary tool as they call it. It's a big beastie. I had a Dremel cordless. It failed just recently, so I've got one of these and I really like it. It is quite hefty though, so anyway, we'll get on with it. Okay, so we're making some progress now with the tender. I've cleaned out the coal bunker and where those mounting points are, and I've created a new mounting point, and that goes through to a screw hole right at the back here that sits underneath the tender. You can see I've got the screw in there at the moment. So that's all ready to be mounted, and now it's a matter of putting it all together. So that's the next few steps. Okay, so the next step is to wire in the decoder. This has already got an 8-pin plug on it, but as you've seen, I've removed the 8-pin plug. So now it's just a matter of matching up the wires in the tender, which are coloured red and black to the track, orange and grey to the motor. So just getting those right. You might be wondering what the extra wires are for on the back of this. This is for a power pack if you want to connect an ESU power pack. Given this is a tender loco with tender pickups, I'm not going to bother with that. And then the other wires on here, we need the blue, white and yellow ones for doing the lights, and we need the brown wires for the speaker. The purple ones for an extra function. If I was going to stick a smoke unit in it, then I would use something like that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is connect up the decoder here. And so the first thing that you've got to do is strip off a little bit of the end of each wire. Now you could shorten these wires considerably if you want to. I don't. I like to leave them long because as you might have seen in some of my other videos, that just allows you to remove the decoder out and give you some room to play with the body, and you don't have to worry about it being too tight. So what I've done here is just to twist some wires together. So here, I'll just move the decoder around the road for a sec. So here, these are the two pickup wires, one from the Loco plug, which sits down in here, and one from the tender body. And so all I do is just get them close together and give them a twist. If they want to play, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. There we go. And so twisting those together just helps to keep them in place when we're soldering the other wires onto them. And so sometimes they twist really well. Okay, so let's start with those red wires, and we'll bring the decoder over and the red wire from the decoder. Now, the most important thing to do here is to make sure you put on the shrink wrap. And I put on the shrink tube just on the end here. And one of the tricks that I've learnt over the years is to actually solder not like so, where the wires are sort of running perpendicular to each other, but actually solder them in parallel. And what that does is it creates a little lip for the shrink tube or the heat shrink to actually, if you like, hook onto when it's shrunk, and it just keeps it in position. I had a Loco that I sent to Canada recently, and when the guy put it on the track, the decoder went pop because all the heat shrink had moved off where it was on the wires. So this just helps to keep everything in place. So that's ready to go now. We get our soldering iron from over here. Just drop the solder. Okay, so we get our soldering iron, got our wires there, got our wires crossed, haha, and we just tap a bit of solder onto there, and there's your uncle. And so, just showing you what I mean, now that's, I don't know if you can see how clearly you can see that at the moment, but that tag end is a bit long after I've soldered it, so I'll just clean it up by cutting it off nice and evenly. And look at that, solder joint didn't work properly. So always important to test those joints to make sure that they work. It's interesting, so this is my third attempt at getting this wiring done. It looks like the Hornby wire isn't taking the solder very well, so I'm just going to, I've tinned it already and just flood the joint with a bit more solder, and we've definitely got it that far. So now, what I was saying about the tag end. So if you look at this, I slide the heat shrink down and cover that end over like that. And then if I use the little blowtorch, it's a handy little gadget. So when I do this, hopefully what you can see is when I heat this, it's shrinking now, is you actually get a bit of a bulge there for it to basically seal around and it doesn't move. And so I find that to be much more reliable in terms of keeping the heat shrink in place. So now I'll do the remaining wires. Okay, so now we're ready to mount the speaker into the tender, and those who would have seen my previous video on this know that one of my favourite ways of dealing with this is with blue tack. So if you haven't used blue tack before, there's black tack as well if you want to use that. But basically what I'm going to do is mount this speaker into the tender body, just in here. Now I'm going to push it as far back as possible and get it down close, because what I've found is that I can actually fit the decoder in there with no problem as well. So all I need to do is just get a bit of blue tack. Now this one I don't really need to worry about sealing all the way around, because basically it's in a sealed enclosure, and when we put the top of the coal load over that hole underneath there, that will provide a decent baffle. So all I need to do is just make sure that it's stuck down. But before I do that, other than removing a screw that's got on there, the first thing we have to do is solder our two speaker wires onto the speaker here. And there's two little prongs there, a plus and a minus. Now, the positive and negative does matter on a speaker, and you might find that people say it doesn't, but I have found that on some speakers it really does matter to get the polarity right. The idea is that the speaker the speaker baffle is moving up and down. So if it's moving up and down this way, and you reverse the polarity, it just reverses the way it goes, but the vibration still comes through at the same frequency. Now, some speakers are actually better at doing at resolving that polarity difference than others. I'm not exactly sure why, but anyway, in terms of the ESU decoders, there isn't a clear indication of what's positive and plus or minus in terms of the speaker wire, but I tend to use the top one going to the positive, and the so if you look on here, the top wire, if I do it around this way, the top wire here I put to positive, and the next one down I put to negative. Now I don't know if that's strictly right, but it's worked for me. So anyway, so we're going to solder these on now, and hopefully that will get us to an operating decoder. So now that the speaker wires are all soldered, the last thing to do is put all the shrink tube over, or the heat shrink over the joins. Please don't forget to do this. I've seen too many decoders go poof when people have forgotten to do this. So make sure that you put all of the heat shrink over the joins and shrink it onto the joins, so that they're nice and protected. Do this before testing the decoder. Why? Well, I speak from experience. And yes, if you don't do this, poof. So I'm just getting these all ready to be shrunk on, and then we should be ready to go. But let's see how we go. Okay, so now we're going to stick this speaker into the tender and fit the decoder as well. So I've just broken off a bit of blue tack. I'm not going to do too much with it. Keep it fairly thin, and probably just put a little bit on either side, something along those lines. And I'll shove him up there, put the speaker wires behind it, and then slowly push it in to the tender. making sure it goes in as far as possible and sitting down nice and flat and up towards the end as far as it will go. And that's in place. And so now the intent is that the decoder will sit in flush right in this end piece here, and it'll sit right in there. I've just got to move that speaker up a little bit more just to fit all of that in, but I think it's going to be just about perfect. So now we could actually put that back on and we'd be pretty much ready to go once you tuck the wires in, etc. So we'd be ready to go. We could hook it up to the Loco. What I'm going to do though is tidy up these wires a little bit, and you can see that we've still got some wires left over. So that's because we've got to hook up the firebox flicker, and so let's get that sorted next. Okay, so now we're bringing this all together. What I've noticed is that there's a small channel, I don't know if you can see it if I point it out here, there's a small channel running down through the chassis that the white plug goes out, so I'm going to try and use that. And I think there's enough room there to fit the wires from the firebox flicker LED down through here. And that's one of the reasons that I've left them quite long, so that they're easy to maneuver. And so we stick them down that channel and down through the other end. And somebody's heading away. And Mr. White goes down. There was a thing on the radio this morning about anthropomorphizing and talking to inanimate objects. I do it all the time. And we can push that through. There, pull him through. Look at that, beautiful. Now, you might notice on the end of this motor is a capacitor. That's for TV suppression. Now, you can choose to remove that, but if you do, it's actually wired across the two terminals, so you actually have to rewire it. I'm going to leave it alone at the moment. I've found that on some Locos it makes a difference, but not on many. It certainly used to be a big problem, but I've not had any issues with the lock sound decoders. So now I'm just nicely lining that wire up, putting the body of the chassis back in the body, and then we've got these nice wires coming out here that we can then put into the tender. So now I've threaded those wires through, and what I've also done is found a little hole in the tender where I can bring these wires up, and we can hook them to the blue and white, but also the yellow. And the reason for doing this is that what that gives me is that I actually get two lighting functions on the firebox flicker. I use usually a Mars light or a gyro light to give a slow pulsing fire. And then when the fireman opens the firebox door, then I introduce the firebox flicker, and you can do that by how you program the decoder, and some decoders come with that already built in. So that's what we're going to do here, and you'll see the effect when I play around with that later on. So what we've got to do is hook up this white wire from the firebox flicker to Mr. Yellow and Mr. White, and also the blue one just goes straight to the blue wire there. So again, I'll just hook those up, and we should be pretty close to done. We'll put the Loco back together completely and give it a test. one thing that I'm going to do is actually trim off these two spare wires, purple and green. They're for additional functions if you want to use them. If you clip them off very, very close to the decoder without cutting any other wires, because there's a mass of wires there now, then you can make sure that you minimise any shorts, well, you don't want any shorts whatsoever, so you minimise the chance of getting any. So we get in there. We got that one done, and Mr. Purple, I'm going to the Captan tape over this. This is polyamide tape, which is really good as an insulator. So I'm just going to use a little bit of this polyamide tape. So let's bring the decoder out a little bit on the third hand. So probably about so much. Just lay that over the end to make sure that those wires are the ends of those wires are completely covered. And there we go. That decoder is ready for fitting. So now we can put that decoder in to the spot that I had for it. I can't remember which way I went now. But I went one way. There we go. It sits in there really neatly, up as far as it can go. And so now let's put the tender back, and I'll bring those wires through. Now, one thing I like to do is just give these wires a twist together. So I'm just twisting these wires, and it just makes them a bit neater. You can do lots of different things here to make them neat, but this will make sure that they sit where they belong. Sit underneath there, and get it the right way around with our new mounting block. Make sure all the wires are tucked in. They usually try to stick out the side a little bit. I can actually tuck them up inside there. Actually, that works out quite well. We could have actually brought them up and laid them on top there. Actually, why don't we do that? Toothpick. So here's actually what we could do completely. I've only just thought of this. Is stick the decoder right up the top here. There we go. That's much, much neater now. And we can bring most of those wires up as well. Look at that. And then that will all sit together very neatly, like so. And what we'll do is we'll mount the decoder down in that spot there, and I did this on another Loco, and I should have realised it the other day, or when I was doing this. So we'll just put the decoder there, like so. Hopefully you can see that okay. And then that'll all be covered with the coal load when we're done. So I'll just get that in spot and hook it all up, and then we can see how we go. So I've got the tender body back on. I'm just putting the plug in. Make sure that you get it around the right way. It'll only go in one way, but just be careful. Don't bend the prongs that are in there. I really wish they'd made that plug be able to handle the special tool, but anyway. If you sat through all this video, you know what I'm talking about. If not, this plug doesn't exactly fit with the Hornby tool that's supposed to be for that purpose. I'm just going to twist the blue and white wires around like so, so that they're nice and neat along there, and then we can hook up the coupling, the drawbar, sorry, and put it. Okay, so I've got that in position now, so we just put down the front. The reason that was stopping it, the motor's magnetic. It picked up a screw from here, and that was stopping it from going down. So then all we've got to do is put in the front screw, which we've got here, this nice machine screw, and then the Loco is ready for testing. Sorry, wrong screwdriver. So just putting this one in the front here, With that big front bogey of the road. Crikey, they had a big front bogey on these Kings. Ta-da! And now we have our King ready for testing. So what I'm going to do is I'll get this hooked up to the programming track. I've got a NC system, and I've got my old power cab. I'll just swing this around a little bit. You might be able to just see it. So excuse all the shit everywhere, the mess, sorry. But if you look here, that's my PCP panel for the NCE system, and so what I'm going to do is put the Loco on that track there and test it out. Okay, so I've put the Loco on the track now. Let's give it a whirl and see what happens. So this is the first test, so the first thing we've got to do, I'm just going to leave the NCE system down there, is turn on number 1. You should hear smoke box hiss. Then I'm going to toot the whistle, which is a playable whistle. And there's also a short whistle, or maybe not. That's a long whistle. Okay, so there we go. I haven't got much track here, so I can only go to there on the programming track, so let's just go reverse and let's hear what it does. Oh, snifter shuts. A bit more welly. Whoa. That is one meaty chuff. And it's just stopped. Really? I think we can say that that works. Really impressed by the sound of that. It's even better with this 1925 S speaker. It's got a real deep bark to it. So anyway, I'm going to finish this Loco off now, and we can get it on the track and do some demos. So I've put the Loco all back together again. I don't think I've ever had a Loco with so many bits falling off it, so be aware of that. I've found that with some of these modern Locos now from China, that the bits and pieces, the amount of super glue that they use to glue stuff on is only fairly small. Anyway, it's all been put back together again, and I've programmed the corrected, or the right address. I just used the 4 digits on the cab number, which is 6023. So if I turn on sound now, sound's there. We can turn on the firebox light, and then we can toot the whistle, and now the Loco, I've got it on the rolling road, so we can test it. So that's working quite well now, just the injector shutting off. I'm just going to show you now how to program the Chuff synchronization. If there's one thing I like to get right, it's having the Loco having the correct number of chuffs per revolution. So we'll do that now. So now I'm going to change the chuff rate of the Loco, and what I'm going to do is adjust it at speed step 1. Now the CV, the two CVs that control the chuff rate on this Loco or on Locksound decoders is CV57, which is the low speed one, and CV58, which is the high speed one. Now I can set this now, I'll stop it, and I'll put it on the program track. So I go down here to programming and I press that 4 times, and that says now use program track. So I'll use the program track and I'm going to read a CV, so CV 57. So go to there and we'll put in number 57, enter, and it says the value is 85. So that means that at the moment at 85, that gives us close to 4 chuffs, and that's what it was when I started mucking around with it. But it's still not quite right in my ears, and I like to get that really right. So what I'm going to do now is go back here on the Loco, get it going again on speed step 1, and we're going to change that value. So let's see what the chops are doing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Up here for 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 1 should have been at the top, so it needs to go a little bit slower, and we do that by increasing the value of the CV. So now that the Loco is running, I can do this programming on the main by just pressing the program button. Again, program, we're going to program on the main, we're going to program this Loco, and we're going to do CV 57, and I'm going to set it to a slightly higher value of 90, and we'll see how that goes. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 up the top again. So that's really close. So now if I speed this up to speed step 4, we'll see what it looks like at speed step 4 now. One, 2, 3, 4, up the top, 2, 3, 4. So it's slightly a bit too fast here now, the chuff rate for the wheels. The wheels haven't returned back to the top. So what I'm going to do now is just adjust CV 58. But first of all, I'll stop this. Program on the programming track again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Enter. CV, 58. Enter. And its value is 30, so let's get this going again. At speed step 4, tweak the whistle to bring the sound back up. Just bring that back up. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's set the value of 58 to a slightly higher value. Let's make it 40 and see what happens. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now the wheels are a bit faster, so let's put that value, 58, to 35, halfway between them, and we should be just about spot on now. So that's how I do chuff programming now.